We'll move to question time, and Senator Chandler.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. There have been 11 rate rises since Labor came to government just over a year ago, but core inflation remains higher than all of the G7 nations except the United Kingdom. Yesterday, the RBA announced that it doesn't expect higher inflation to return to band until late 2025, meaning interest rates will be higher for longer. After an additional $185 billion of spending in your last budget, which economists described as unambiguously expansionary and likely to add to inflation, will you finally admit that your fiscal policy is keeping inflation higher for longer and fuelling the cost of living crisis?
Thank you, Senator Chandler. Minister Gallagher.
Well, the short answer to that is no, given that I have longer to expand on that, our budget, which included $40 billion worth of savings across October and May, which was approximately $40 billion more than the last budgets of your government. The peak of inflation, the quarter, was in March of 22, which was under your government's economic policies. And we have said for some time that inflation remains the major challenge across our economy and that it is staying higher for longer than we would like. But our budget has been calibrated to ensure that fiscal policy is working hand in hand with monetary policy and that the decisions we took, President, didn't make the bank's job any harder. We acknowledge that people are doing it tough, which is why, within the restraint that we showed in our budgets of banking the revenue, banking 87% of the upward revisions to revenue, by finding $40 billion worth of savings, by ending the waste and rorts, by rebuilding the public service so that it can deliver the services that the Australian people expect, we still found room, as we should have, for $14.6 billion worth of cost of living measures. And they go to investments in Medicare, investments in cheaper medicines, investments in childcare, investments in people relying on payments who are doing it tough, on energy bill relief, on investing in skills for the future, on ensuring that we're dealing with the energy transition and making sure Australia is positioned to grab the opportunities that are coming from the decarbonisation that we're seeing across the global economy. We are doing all of that, and still we have the Bank and the Treasury Secretary confirming that our budget was not inflationary.
Senator Chandler, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. Before the election, the Prime Minister claimed that Australians would have cheaper mortgages under Labor. With inflation remaining higher for longer under Labor, an average family with a $750,000 mortgage will have to find more than $22,000 each year to pay that mortgage. Is this what the Prime Minister meant by cheaper mortgages?
Thank you, Senator Chandler. Minister Gallagher.
My recollection of the reference to the Prime Minister's comments were in relation to the release of our housing policy during the election, where we released a number of policy areas to generate and deal with the housing challenge that we have inherited from a former government who was there for a decade that disengaged from any role in housing policy. That is what we are fixing. So it's not only do you see us having to deal with the energy failures that we inherited, there's a whole litany of areas. May I remind the party of robo-debt? May I remind the party of aged care failures? May I remind the party of housing failures? So we inherited a situation where the Commonwealth had completely disengaged, and we went to the election with a comprehensive housing policy, which we are delivering if the Senate would get out of the way of blocking one of those signature policies.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Chandler, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Last month in Hobart, the Cost of Living Committee heard evidence from Foodbank Tasmania that it was preparing for even more people needing its services as fixed mortgage rates fall away over the coming months. Is the increased demand on charities what the Prime Minister meant when he said that Australians would be better off under Labor?
Thank you, Senator Chandler. Minister Gallagher.
Well, in relation to that question, I do preface this by acknowledging that Australians are doing it tough, which is why our budget has been focused on making room for investments where we are able to afford it and to target those investments to areas of high need. In relation to the community sector, which does do an incredible job in relation to emergency provision of services, whether it be food relief or indeed housing, the government has fixed another one of the areas of your failure, which is the indexation rate, where you didn't even bother to index the community sector in a way where they could afford to continue their provision of services and pay their staff. And we have come in and lifted that rock up and had a look at where you placed that rock, and we have fixed that as well, so that the community sector is able to meet some of those increasing costs, and we will work with them hand in hand, as you would expect to see any further areas of support we can provide.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Green.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Special Minister of State, Senator Farrell. It is really important that all eligible Australians are enrolled to vote in the lead-up to this year's referendum. However, we know that some groups have faced barriers to enrolling which have seen them unrepresented on the electoral roll and therefore unable to participate. I understand that's why the government has been supporting the Australian Electoral Commission to remove barriers for these Australians, which has already led to significant increases in enrolment. Can the Minister please update the Senate on the record number of Australians now on the electoral roll?
Thank you, Senator Green. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Green for her interest in this area, and it's a very important part of our democracy. And yes, I can update you on those issues that you've raised, because after coming to government, the Albanese government funded the AEC to improve Indigenous enrolment. And earlier this year, we acted to remove regulatory barriers and support greater enrolment of eligible Australians. And this has been paying dividends. Last week, the Australian Electoral Commission announced that enrolment in Australia has skyrocketed ahead of the 2023 referendum. National enrolment is now estimated to be at 97.5%. I'll repeat that figure. 97.5%, with over 17.5 million Australians on the electoral roll. But more significantly, enrolment of underrepresented groups is going through the roof. Enrolment of young Australians is over 90% for the first time in the nation's history, and more First Nations Australians are now enrolled than ever before, with enrolment at 94.1%. And remember this, this is up from 80% in June 2022, shortly before we came to government. It isn't just the work of the AEC that's driving up enrolment. Australians want to have a say at the Voice referendum. First Nations Australians clearly want to have a say on the Voice to Parliament. Young people want to have a say on the Voice to Parliament. And we are committed to working with the AEC to ensure all eligible Australians are enrolled to vote.
Order.
The referendum is an opportunity for all Australians to get behind the Voice to Parliament, and I encourage Australians to make sure they enrol to vote in the lead-up to this important referendum.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Green, first supplementary.
Thank you, President. It's clear from this that First Nations Australians want to have their say on the Voice. This isn't really surprising, since the Voice is an idea that came from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people through the Uluru Statement of the Heart, and is widely supported by representatives of First Nations Australians. Can the Minister please outline what the government is hearing from representatives about their wish to participate in the Voice referendum later this year?
Thank you, Senator Green. Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Green for her first supplementary question. And yes, I can, Senator, I thank the Senator for the opportunity to further expand on First Nations enrolment. As I outlined, the enrolment of First Nations Australians is now at a record level because First Nations Australians clearly want to participate in the referendum on the Voice. This is no surprise, as the Voice came from First Nations Australian and is widely backed by First Nations Australians. We keep hearing from First Nations Australians who are already to get behind the voice. This includes Adelaide Crows legend, listen to this, Senator Birmingham, Eddie Betts, who has said, "I know the voice won't fix everything overnight, but I feel like it's an opening of a pathway to make sure we are included and respected in decision-making on issues that impact us."
Thank you, Minister. Senator Green, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. The Minister outlined that in addition to record levels of First Nations Australians enrolled to vote, enrolment of young Australians is at record levels. I know from listening to young people in my state that they are ready to get behind the voice at the ballot box. Can the Minister please outline what the government is hearing from representatives of young Australians about their enthusiasm to participate in the Voice referendum later this year?
Minister Farrell.
Thank you, President, and thank Senator Green for her second supplementary question. And the Albanese government has taken action to improve enrolment of all Australians, and I'm now pleased to say that young Australians aged between 18 and 24 are now enrolled at record levels. This cohort of young Australians are eager to have their say in the first referendum in their lifetime, and I'm confident that young Australians are ready to get behind the voice to Parliament. In words of the Uluru Youth Dialogue co-chair, Alira Davis, and she says, more than 73% of young Australians support the voice. We know young people want to make sure this happens and see a successful referendum. I encourage all Australians to enrol to vote and get behind the voice.
Thank you, Minister. Senator McGrath.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. On at least 34 occasions, the Prime Minister has committed to implementing the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full. Minister, in 2017 on the ABC's Q&A program, Noel Pearson was asked to explain the Uluru Statement and expressly said there would need to be, quote, a framework agreement nationally. This morning on Radio National, the Prime Minister was asked on 7 occasions whether he supported a treaty. He refused to give a direct answer. Does the government's commitment to implementing the Uluru Statement from the Heart in full include committing to a treaty?
Thank you, Senator McGrath. Minister Wong.
Well, this government does support bringing Australians together.
That's right.
And that is what Makarrata is about. That is what Makarrata is about, and that is also what the Voice is about. And what we know is those opposite want to talk about everything else other than what the referendum is about. That is what they want to do. And really, it reflects upon them that this is the approach they choose to take on an issue that is so important to the heart and soul of the nation. Senator McGrath knows that the referendum is not about the matters he asked in his question. He knows that the government's policy is a constitutionally enshrined voice to achieve better outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in health, in education, in jobs and in housing. But because he does, well, I'll take the interjection from Senator Cash, the chief fearmonger on that side, that you want to talk about everything other than how a voice might actually help First Nations people in this country. Regrettably, what this opposition continues to choose to do is to talk about everything else but what the Voice is and what it will do, and what it could do for First Nations people and for our nation. You see, the reality is I think Australians do want to close the gap. I think Australians know that what we have done to date on both sides of politics over many decades has left us with a gap that is unacceptable. And people should be clear that we want to implement the Voice that First Nations people have asked for, because we believe that when you listen to people, you get better outcomes, and we want to close the gap between our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and the rest of Australia.
The time for answering has expired. Senator McGrath, first supplementary.
Minister, back in 2017, only the first page of the Uluru Statement from the Heart was released to the Australian people. The full statement has now been released under FOI. It discusses the priority between treaty and constitutional reform and explicitly says a treaty could cover matters such as reparations and a financial settlement such as, quote, seeking a percentage of GDP. Minister, what percentage of GDP does the government consider would be an appropriate amount for Australians to pay as a financial settlement?
Order. Order. Before I call the minister, I'm going to remind the chamber, order, that the senator asking the question has the right to be heard in silence. Equally, when the minister responds, she has the right to be heard in silence. Minister Wong.
Well, I think we have again on display the same tactic which I referenced in response to the primary questions. You want to talk about everything but the voice. You want to talk about what Mr Pearson said. You want to talk about something that happened, some documents that you've now found in relation to a statement that you used to support.
Senator Wishful,
I would make this point. I would make this point because those opposite want to talk about treaties. What has happened since 1986 is that treaties and agreements are already underway in Victoria, Queensland and Northern Territory. And you know what? At the time, and I believe subsequently, those processes were supported by the Victorian LNP, the Queensland LNP, and others, others from the party of those opposite. Now, I actually wasn't sure that was true, Senator McGrath, and I went back and asked my office to check, is it really true the Queensland LNP did support this process? They did,
Thank you, Minister.
which shows what you are doing now.
The time for answering has expired. Senator McGrath, second supplementary.
Minister, on 20 February you made a statement on social media saying #vote for the voice, #voice treaty truth. Does on your own statement confirm that the Albanese government intends to begin negotiating a treaty should the voice referendum be successful, or was your statement supporting a treaty
Order.
just a throwaway line?
Order. Senator Watt, I have just finished advising the chamber that questions are to be asked with silence. Equally, when I call the minister is to be listened to in silence. Minister Wong.
What I would say this. I would say that the voice is nothing to be afraid of. I would say that the voice is nothing like the sort of political bogeymen bogeys that bogeymen that those on those sides wish to keep utilising. I would also make this point to those opposite. I believe that there are some things bigger than politics. And I would ask those opposite to reflect on whether they really want to use the soul and fabric of this nation as a political battleground. As a political battleground. Because the voice is not about Mr Albanese or Mr Dutton. It's not about Liberal and Labor. It's not about politics in this place. It is about the aspirations and hopes of our First Nations peoples as they have articulated to us.
Order.
And we have an opportunity to bring the nation together.
Order.
There are some things above politics.
Minister, order across the chamber. Order. Senator Brown, that includes you. It's not a request, it's a direction. Senator McKim.
Thank you, President. My question's to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Minister, as you know, the Greens have written to the Treasurer informing him that we will not pass the government's budget measure relating to the petroleum resource rent tax unless the government agrees to support our proposal to double the revenue collected from gas corporations. Minister, the choice for the government is now abundantly clear. You can either work with the Greens and the crossbench to double the revenue, or get half that amount and weaken environmental protections on gas projects in a dirty deal with the opposition and the gas corporations. Minister, which is it going to be?
Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. Well, the government will be seeking to implement its budget decision, which has been outlined in our budget papers, where we would be making some sensible changes to the PRRT, and those changes will see the offshore LNG industry pay more tax and pay it sooner. And it will contribute I think it's $2.4 billion across the forward estimates to assist with budget repair, but also to ensure that we have the resources available to continue to invest in the services that people of Australia deserve and expect. It was the result of some methodical work that was undertaken by the Treasury around the options. About options to improve the operation of the PRRT, and the option that was decided on by the government gives the biggest return to Australians sooner, and we did that within the context of ensuring that we can supply gas to our population and that we can honour our international obligations. It was a sensible change, and if the Greens have decided to oppose that budget decision, then of course we look forward to the decision of the coalition and hope that this doesn't turn into, well, we hope that it doesn't turn into another one of these decisions where we don't get the support of the coalition for this sensible change. It's being backed by the industry. We have been cautious and careful with our considerations on this. We believe that the Australian budget should receive more revenue from this measure, and we are hopeful, if we can't win the support of the crossbench or the Greens, that we would win the support of other members of this chamber.
Thank you, Minister. Senator McKim, first supplementary.
Minister, isn't it true that actually this proposal was designed by the gas cartel in this country? Isn't it also true that 15 gas corporations and peak fossil fuel bodies signed non-disclosure agreements with Treasury to enable them to design the government's proposed PRRT changes? Treasurer, Minister, how many environment, climate and community groups were invited into the design process?
Before I call the Minister, I'm going to remind people that interjections are disorderly. Minister Gallagher.
The answer to Senator McKim's question is no, and the policy was designed by the Treasury and agreed to by the government. And I think in terms of the consultations that happened, it is not unusual that the government would engage with industry stakeholders around a revenue measure that impacts on their industry. That is business as usual for government in that sense. Non-disclosure agreements as part of that consultation are standard operations as well. It is right that the Cabinet on the ERC, when making decisions, has a full understanding of the industry impacts that would be proposed by any proposed change, and the normal processes were undertaken in relation to this measure.
Thank you, Minister. Senator McKim, second supplementary.
Thank you, President. Minister, why has the government carved Woodside's North West Shelf project out of this tax? Has it got anything to do with the massive political donations which are poured every year out of Woodside's obscene profits into the coffers of the Labor Party?
Thank you, Senator McKim. Minister Gallagher.
Well, this is a common theme from the Greens. The answer to that is no. And if they are going to make assertions like that, or insinuations like that, then they should stump up with any evidence they have to support such a claim. They are continuing to do this in estimates in almost every forum around that they choose to besmirch the decision-making process and the processes that are legally underway through our political organisations, including the Greens political party as well. We operate under the same laws that the Greens political party does when they raise donations for themselves as well. So if you've got something to say, if you've got something to prove, then bring it forward. But I think it's very lazy to just stand up and point the finger without anything to back that up.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Pratt. Senator McKim.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Health, Senator Gallagher. At a time when we know many Australians are seeing additional pressure on their household budgets, can the Minister please outline how the Albanese government's cheaper medicines policies are not only delivering savings to Australians and making it easier and cheaper to get their scripts filled, but also helping combat inflationary pressures?
Thank you, Senator Pratt. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Pratt for the question. And as I said in my earlier answer to Senator Chandler, we do understand that many Australians are doing it tough as cost of living pressures bite into household budgets, which is why we have looked carefully at areas where the government can take pressure off those cost of living pressures. This is why we are acting and have acted through the October and the May budget to provide cost of living relief where we can, targeted and timed, so that it does not add to the inflation pressures we're seeing across the economy. One of the key actions we're taking in this area is to make medicines cheaper. It was a key election commitment of this government, and on the 1st of January this year, for the first time in 75-year history of the PBS, the general co-payment was reduced from $42.50 to $30. And already, in less than 7 months, Australians have saved $118 million on nearly 11 million cheaper prescriptions. It's why we've introduced the new nationally consistent opioid dependence treatment program that means tens of thousands of Australians will finally get the same benefit that every other Australian gets for PBS medicines. And from July 1, they will pay the PBS co-payment on these vital medicines and save up to $200 per month.
Cost of living relief.
As we announced in the budget, from the 1st of September, we are also introducing 60-day prescriptions for more than 300 medicines that will benefit 6 million Australians with ongoing health conditions, giving them twice the medication for the cost of a single script. This policy was recommended by independent clinical experts at the Pharmaceutical Benefit Advisory Committee back in 2018, advice that was ignored by the previous government. 60-day prescriptions is the norm in so many countries, and it's undeniably good health policy.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Pratt, first supplementary.
How will the government work in partnership with pharmacies around Australia who deliver important healthcare support to their communities to roll out these reforms, particularly those in rural and regional communities? What assistance will be provided to make this transition to cheaper medicines smoother?
Thank you, Senator Pratt. Minister.
Thank you, President. I thank Senator Pratt for her question. The government is committed to work in partnership with pharmacies, particularly those in regional and remote communities. In the budget, the government committed to reinvest every single dollar that the government saves with 60-day scripts straight back into the community pharmacy sector, so pharmacists can play an even more central role in the healthcare of Australians. This government has increased payments for services like dispensing, handling, administration and infrastructure by 7% more for all community pharmacies. The government recognises the importance of rural and regional pharmacies and will be investing in them accordingly. Starting this month, the government has doubled the budget for the regional pharmacy maintenance allowance, and from September 1 this year, the government is introducing the regional pharmacy transition allowance to support pharmacies in the transition to 60-day scripts. This will provide $148.2 million over 4 years for eligible pharmacies in rural, regional and remote Australia.
Senator Pratt, second supplementary.
Given the government's changes to deliver cheaper medicines will have a positive impact on people's households' budgets, particularly important at this time, and given that 60-day dispensing is commonplace in other countries like the USA, New Zealand and Canada, why did the former government choose not to act on this targeted cost of living relief, and why do they appear to remain opposed to Australians getting their medicines more cheaply and efficiently?
Thank you, Senator Pratt. Minister Gallagher.
Why is that? Tell us.
Thank you. Thank you, President. This is another area where we saw a distinct lack of action from the former government, which meant that people have paid more for their medicines for longer than they needed to. The government is acting on the expert clinical advice of PBAC. We are acting on the advice that the former government chose to ignore. And from the 1st of September, we are implementing this advice because it's not only good health policy, but it also makes medicines cheaper and help Australians with their cost of living challenges. Introducing 60-day scripts for stable ongoing conditions was a recommendation from the PBAC in 2018. The 2018 recommendation was never implemented by the former government. those in the coalition now, costing Australians billions of dollars in lost savings. Well, people have had to pay more for their medicines for longer than they needed to. There are millions of Australians with ongoing health conditions who deserve an explanation. And this, of course, is a reform that is supported by many in the health sector who want to see people pay less for their medicine.
Senator Hanson.
Thank you very much. My question is to the Minister representing the Minister for Climate Change and Energy, Senator Wong. Minister Wong, people in your state of South Australia are paying an average cost of 35 cents per kilowatt hour compared to 22 cents in Victoria, 25 cents in Queensland, 26 cents in Tasmania, 28 cents in New South Wales and 30 cents in Western Australia. Will the Minister please explain why the state with the highest penetration of renewables also has the highest electricity prices in the nation, while your government keeps claiming renewables are cheaper?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. Thank you to Senator Hanson for the question. And Senator Hanson may be aware that the transition from carbon-intensive energy generation to renewables did occur earlier in South Australia, and I think we all know there have been challenges with how that has been. With that, given the speed with which that had to occur, it did have to occur, yes, but I would make this point that the reason that we say renewables are cheaper is because that's what the data shows. And I would refer you to the...
Order.
Well, the AEMO, the electricity market operator. So, well, this is like the fact-free debate we had in the coalition for 10 years, and which is why we are where we are. But if I could just go back so I can answer Senator Hanson's question, the electricity market operator said that less volatile market conditions, improved generation availability and higher renewable output put downward pressure on wholesale electricity prices. Increased market share of lower marginal cost renewables helped push down the wholesale electricity costs from Q2 2022, despite the quarter having the highest underlying demand recorded since 2016. So the market operator themselves, Senator Hanson, I know you don't agree with this, but I'm simply saying to you that the advice to government and the advice from the market operator, not a politician, not a lobbyist, but the person, the entity in charge of running the electricity market, has made clear that renewables...
Minister Wong, please resume your seat. Senator Roberts.
President, Senator Wong is talking about Australia, not South Australia. She's hiding behind averages.
That's not a point of order, Senator Roberts. Our Minister, please continue.
Well, I was responding to the point that Senator Hanson made, that where she disputed renewables being cheaper.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Hanson, first supplementary.
Mind you that your state runs on solar, wind and gas when it's needed. No, you blew up your power station in 2016. That's why your prices have actually gone up and the rest of the states have coal. My question is, on the 20th of July, Claire Lehman reported in The Australian that when taken into account the full cost of renewables to an energy system, solar is 14 times more costly than nuclear energy and wind is 4.7 times more costly. Will the Minister please explain to the Australian people the real cost of intermittent renewables
your question
in
has
their
expired.
soaring...
Senator Hanson, when I call you, you are expected to stop and to sit down. Minister Wong.
Thank you. I'm asked about what Ms Savage said, and I have a quote from her from March of this year. We've seen unprecedented volatility in our wholesale electricity markets over the last couple of years, very high coal and gas prices as a result of the war in Ukraine and the recovery from the pandemic. We've also seen a number of outages, in particular in our old coal plants. So she's making the point. That there are a number of reasons that electricity prices are being driven up. And the reality is all of the advice to government and the data from the market as well. So not only...
Senator Ruston. Your constant interjections are incredibly disorderly and disrespectful. Minister Wong, please continue.
The advice to government very clearly is that renewables are the cheapest form of new installed power. And I would also make the point, I've looked at the electricity prices across the states, and I have to say I don't necessarily agree with the premise of your primary question.
Thank you, Minister. The time for answering has expired. Senator Hanson, second supplementary.
Wind, solar, gas and coal from Australia, so stop blaming the Ukraine war for this. Under the National Electricity Rule, wind and solar operators get the same price as gas operators, yet they are cheaper to produce, as you declare, but charged at the same higher rate. When are you going to stop this rorting and bring electricity prices down for families and businesses?
Thank you, Senator Hanson. Minister Wong.
Well, in relation to the latter, Senator Hanson, you would know the government has already put in place measures to seek to take the edge off the electricity price increases that Australians are facing. I would make the point that obviously those opposite chose to vote against it. We know that that was in effect a vote for higher electricity prices. In relation to your questions about your point about Ukraine and Russia, we work in an international market. So the price of coal and gas, even if produced in Australia, is not disconnected from the international market and the fact that supply is constrained. Well, you may shake your head, Senator Hanson. It is not disconnected. We may be an island continent, but we work in a global market, and we are not insulated. We are not insulated from international movements in coal and gas prices. So I make the point again, the evidence shows that renewables are
thank
cheaper,
you, Minister.
and that is what the government is
has
focused on.
expired. Senator Little.
Thank you. My question is to the Minister for Finance, Senator Gallagher. Minister, you have explicitly posted on social media and spoken about your support for a treaty, as has the Minister for Indigenous Australians, the Prime Minister and most members of your government. Given the confusion created by the Prime Minister, can you confirm that if the Voice referendum is successful later this year, the Albanese government will then commence the process to negotiate one or more national treaties with Indigenous Australians?
Thank you, Senator Little. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, and I thank those opposite for being so interested in my social media account. I never had any ideas.
Give us the handle.
I could just picture you all sitting there having a look, following everyone's social media. Oh, they wanted some good content. Wanted some quality content. So follow us. We're comfortable with that.
Minister, please resume your seat. Order on my right. Order. Order on my right. Order. I have a senator on her feet. Senator Little.
The question was very specific, and it wasn't about being amused about the answer, it was about the question.
Senator Little, you did refer to social media and a number of other
matters. And all the laughing.
Senator Little, the minister is entitled to go to any part of your question. You referred to social media, so I'm sure I will remind the Senator. Order! Order! I will remind the Minister of your question, but I will remind people who ask the questions that if there's a preamble or there's a range of matters that are in the body of the question, the Minister is entitled to refer to them. Thank you, Senator Little. Please continue, Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. And I will remember Senator Little when I post next on social media. Hopeful that she'll enjoy it. The focus for the government is on the Voice, and we and there will be a referendum where everyone will have their opportunity to have a vote. Our focus is on ensuring that we're closing the gap, focusing on Indigenous health, on education, on housing, on jobs, on making a practical difference. And I think there is some agreement, surely, across this chamber that in a number of areas the current situation, the status quo, is not delivering the outcomes that any one of us, any single one of us in this chamber would want to see continue for any time longer. And that is in areas such as incarceration, such as children being placed in out-of-home care, such as babies with low birth weight, such as children assessed as developmentally on track. In all of these areas where we are not seeing the outcomes that we want to see, which is why it is relevant, because it's about outcomes. The Voice is about outcomes. The Uluru Statement from the Heart is about outcomes for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and improving them.
Please resume your seat. Senator Little.
The question was about an outcome, which was, will a treaty be part of that?
Senator Little, if
Haven't
I
heard that
also
word.
remind you, in your question, you went to the Voice, you went to the referendum, you went to social media, all of which the minister is entitled to take into account when she answers. Please resume. The minister is being relevant. Please resume your seat. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you. And the question I'm asked relates to the Uluru Statement from the Heart, and the referendum goes to the Voice, creating constitutional recognition through a voice
Thank
to
you,
this
Minister.
Parliament.
The time for answering has expired. Order. Order. Senator Scarr. Senator Little, first supplementary.
Minister, will you rule out Australian taxpayers being required to pay rent or reparations as part of any treaty negotiated by the Albanese government? And if not, what is the potential cost of such a treaty? Have you done the modelling?
Thank you, Senator Little. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, President. And we all see, with eyes wide open in this chamber, what is going on here. Yes, we do. We all see, and you will have to live with yourselves about your conduct and how you decide to play it yourself.
Please resume your seat. Order on my left. Order. Minister, please continue.
Child's Day. Thank you. I can say, as Minister for Finance, one of the things that worries me greatly is the expenditure that's currently being spent to deliver outcomes that none of us in this place would want to see continue. And we spend billions and billions of dollars every year, year on year, into programs that have not shifted the dial and have not closed the gap. And as Minister for Finance, I have a responsibility to taxpayers to ensure that the money is being spent, is delivering outcomes. And that is why we are supporting a Voice through a yes vote when it comes, because we want to see a practical difference and those outcomes
Minister. The
change.
time for answering has expired. Senator Little, second supplementary.
No, I won't use the word. Minister, in response to a question yesterday, you said the investment in a Makarrata Commission will support the treaty process. However, the Prime Minister has said this isn't about treaty. Have you again misled the Senate, or is the Prime Minister seeking to mislead the Australian people?
Thank you, Senator Little. Minister.
Thank you.
All of you.
Senator Watt.
Thank you. Well, the Voice, as I said yesterday, is about making a practical difference. It's around constitutional recognition. It's about consultation and listening to First Nations people at their request that this is what they would like to see happen, so that we can start shifting the dial in all of those areas, in jobs, in housing, in education, in justice, in all of these areas that I thought we had unanimous agreement on, that we wanted to see progress. I thought that we have seen years and years of the parliament working together to make decisions, and the
Minister,
Voice is simply...
Senator Hughes. Order on my right as well. Senator Green. Please continue, Minister.
So the Voice is about making a practical difference. It's a generous offer about a way forward to change what we're currently doing, which, as everyone in this place would agree, has not been working.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Tyrrell.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Treasurer, Senator Gallagher. Senator Lambie and I have worked with the Greens and with Senator Pocock to make you an offer. We're prepared to back your changes to petroleum resources rent tax with one tweak. We want to do what you're already planning to do, which is capping the use of credits to a company's tax bill. All we're saying is it should be capped at 80% instead of 90%. In exchange, you'll have the numbers to pass your legislation. An alternative way to get your numbers is to support what the Leader of the Opposition has called for and cut the regulation of oil and gas. I know you won't say whether you're going to accept the Opposition's demands, so I just ask it this way. Does the Albanese government believe the oil and gas industry is over-regulated?
Thank you, Senator Tyrrell. Minister Gallagher.
Thank you, Senator Tyrrell. And just in relation to the preamble to your question, in terms of working with you, and we will work with anybody in this chamber to get our legislation through. As you know, sometimes that involves different voting arrangements, but the Greens have certainly indicated that they won't be supporting the bill as it exists. So we will be, looking to the coalition to back in this sensible and modest change to the PRRT. In relation to over-regulation, I would say no, that I don't believe they're over-regulated. And in relation to the PRRT, we have worked with industry around the design of that measure, or consulted with them to ensure that we are doing a number of things, returning money to the budget sooner and at a higher level than would normally have been the case, to ensure that we've got investment happening in the country, to ensure that we've got gas available to households and business as we need to, as we transition to a net zero economy, and thirdly, that we meet our international obligations. We are mindful of those three things as we finalised arrangements for the PRRT.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Tyrrell, first supplementary.
Thank you. I've noticed the Treasurer said that the government's proposed change is going to mean offshore oil and gas pays more tax. But if these companies are being prevented from using some of their credits to pay their tax bill, and those credits carry forward, won't they just have tax-deductible credits for longer? In other words, over the life of a project, won't every company pay the same amount of tax that they would have paid without this change?
Thank you, Senator Tyrrell. Minister Gallagher.
Certainly there is, and to date, the PRRT revenue predominantly relates to oil and gas produced in the Bass Strait, so no offshore LNG project has paid PRRT yet. Most offshore LNG projects are not expected to pay substantial amounts of PRRT before 2030, whilst they are earning significant revenues from Australia's gas resources. Our PRRT revenue collections in 21-22 was $1.64 billion. We are estimating that between 2023 and 24 to 26-27, there'll be revenue in the order of $10.8 billion. And this reform, which does bring forward revenue to the budget in the forward estimates, will raise an additional $2.4 billion in revenue across those 4 years.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Tyrrell, second supplementary.
So if capping credits at 90% brings in more tax sooner, as the Treasurer has claimed, what would capping credits at 80% do?
Thank you, Senator Tyrrell. Minister Gallagher.
I'm not in a position to answer that. I don't have that information in front of me because that isn't the government's policy. If there is anything else I can provide the Senate, I will see. But I would imagine also that Senator Tyrrell, Senator Lambie and Senator Pocock would be engaging directly with the Treasurer on that, as would normally be the case for legislation as we bring it forward to this chamber.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Dean Smith.
Actually, me.
Oh, beg your pardon. Sorry to raise your hopes, Senator Dean Smith.
The good Smith. It's the good Smith.
Yes, sorry, my mistake. Senator Marielle Smith.
Thank you, President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. From speaking to people in our home state of South Australia who faced a decade of inaction on housing and homelessness under the former Liberal and National government, it's clear Australians support our government's ambitious housing reform agenda. In that context, can the Minister outline how the Albanese Labor government is working to deliver its ambitious housing reform agenda and ensure more Australians have access to safe and secure homes? And critically, what is blocking much-needed progress on this vital issue?
Thank you, Senator Smith. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. And I thank, dare I say, the good Senator Smith? But how about our Senator Smith for the question, and thank her as a very active representative of the people of South Australia for her work on this and on Voice, which is also an issue that we know is so important to so many people. There are so many people in South Australia who are interested and focused on how we get more homes on the ground in our state. And people know that we do have an ambitious housing agenda, that we are serious about fixing the mess that those opposite made, and we have already invested billions. The reality is the Liberal and National parties sowed the seeds of a housing crisis and neglected those most in need. We had a wasted decade under the Liberals and Nationals, but on this side we're not wasting a day. A wasted decade, but we're not wasting a day. And we have already created a $2 billion social housing accelerator to deliver thousands of new social homes across Australia. We have already expanded the National Housing Infrastructure Facility. We have already expanded the Home Guarantee Scheme. We've already boosted the National Housing Accord, and we have increased Commonwealth rental assistance by 15%, the largest increase in more than 30 years, and that is some but not all of the measures we put in place. Of course, there is much more Labor wants to do, including the $10 billion Housing Australia Future Fund. And Senator Smith asked me what is blocking progress. Well, the answer is here in this chamber. Here in this chamber, it is the Greens in coalition with the Liberals and Nationals prioritising political tactics and denying shelter to those who need it most. Voting against, let's be clear, because the bill is about delivering more housing, including for women escaping family and domestic violence, including...
Minister Wong, thank you. Senator Marielle Smith, first supplementary.
The Albanese government is working in partnership with the states and territories, local government and the not-for-profit sectors to improve housing for Australians. Can the minister provide an update to the Senate on how the Albanese government's collaboration with these value partners is delivering better housing for Australians?
Thank you, Senator Smith. Minister Wong.
We understand that we have to work with state and territory governments to ensure and with organisations on the front line to respond to housing challenges. And unlike those opposite who always tried to handball this to the states, we've been working with state and territory governments. And you know what they tell us? They tell us pass the HAF. Pass the Housing Australia Future Fund. Power Housing, a network of community housing providers, has said Australians expect federal leadership. The time is now to pass this vital legislation and start taking action on housing affordability through the HAF. And there are other not-for-profit community housing providers who are asking the Greens and the Coalition to pass this legislation. And I just remind again the Senate, this is about crisis accommodation for women escaping family and domestic violence. This is about funding to repair remote Indigenous housing. This is about support for veterans at risk of homelessness. 30,000 new social and affordable housing. You should pass the HAF and you should pass it when it comes to the Senate.
The time for answering has expired. Senator Marielle Smith, second supplementary.
Can the minister explain to the Senate what impact delays to the delivery of the housing reform agenda will have on Australians who are in urgent need of safe and affordable homes?
Thank you, Senator Smith. Minister Wong.
Well, the Greens have said rejecting the Housing Australia Future Fund doesn't have a cost, and well, that's simply not true. It does have a cost, because every day you stall, every day you work with them is another $1.3 million $1.3 million that will not be going into social and affordable housing in Australia. That's what it will mean. The HAF could help fund 30,000 homes for 5 years. And I would say to the Greens political party, don't keep putting your political tactics above the need of those in the community who need more housing. The reality is the Greens and the Coalition are blocking more homes. We on this side of the chamber, we want to build more homes. Those opposite and the Greens, they want to block more homes. So we want to build more homes. The Greens and the Coalition want to block more homes. You should pass the Housing Australia Future Fund when it returns to the Senate.
Order. Senator Henderson.
Thank you, Madam President. My question is to the Minister representing the Prime Minister, Senator Wong. Following the disgraceful incident at the Perth home of Woodside CEO Meg O'Neill yesterday, in which protesters tried to invade her home, has the Prime Minister sought an explanation from the ABC about the involvement of one of its television crews in the incident and how the ABC was provided with the home address of Woodside's CEO?
Thank you, Senator Henderson. Minister Wong.
I share Senator Henderson's concerns about the way in which the media were alerted of this. People have a right to their privacy. People's families have a right to feel safe. And I think all of us would say that it is. We have legitimate political protest in our nation. People have a lot of different views, but there are some things which that right to protest and the freedom of expression that is part of that, the democratic rights which that expresses have to be utilised responsibly. And I personally don't believe, and I think most of us would share it, that it's responsible for such protests to be taken to someone's home where their family is. I don't have any information in relation to how or what happened in relation to the ABC. I will certainly see if there's anything I can do to provide further information about that matter.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Henderson, first supplementary.
Senator, if the protesters informed the ABC that they were going to that address, was it appropriate for the ABC to embargo news of such a reckless protest, and should a responsible journalist have considered alerting police to their advance knowledge of an intended illegal act?
Minister Wong.
Thank you.
Order. Order. Order across the chamber. Order. I've called for order. Senator Colbeck and Senator McKenzie. Order. Order. Minister Wong, please continue. Minister Wong.
The advice I've received, and again, Senator Henderson, I will add to this answer if I'm able to, that the Minister has responded in the House that she has sought further information from the ABC on this matter in addition to their public statements. I don't, that she awaits the further advice she has requested. She does note that the ABC has both operational and editorial independence. I'm not, Senator Henderson. No, please, no one in this chamber. You heard me straight. Please, no one in this chamber, I would think, would support that, but support what has happened. So let's not play.
Order.
There are some things above politics for some of us, Senator Henderson.
Senator Hughes. Order. Senator Henderson, second supplementary.
Minister, we are referring to advanced knowledge of an intended illegal act. Will the government take action and request that the recently appointed ABC Ombudsman conduct an inquiry, an urgent inquiry, into this matter?
Thank you, Senator Henderson. Minister Wong.
Thank you, President. Thank you for the supplementary. In relation to those matters, I will take advice from the Minister and come back to provide further information to the Chamber as to whether or not we can provide anything helpful in relation to your question. I have also just been sent an ABC statement, which the Senator may well be aware of, where the ABC has responded directly to these queries. Well, I have only just seen this, so I'm simply trying to be helpful to the Chamber on an issue that, I think.
Order. Senator Colbeck, there are many opportunities during a sitting week to make a contribution. Question time is not one of them if you are not asking a question. The Minister is responding. Minister Wong.
I have just received a copy of the statement. Others may have seen it. I simply say the statement says that they had no knowledge of what actually was going to occur there and so forth, and the police were already in attendance and arrival. But can I say this again? Families deserve to be safe.
Thank you,
and people
Minister.
are entitled
The time
to their
for
privacy.
answering has expired.
Be placed on notice. Thank you.